Zhang Henshui's The Cause and Effect of Tears and Laughter Chapter 1. The heroic words moved the dust and the world, and the sad music moved the strings, and the whole house was filled with sadness. It is said that Beijing, which has been around for hundreds of years, has now changed to Beiping and has lost the honorific title of the best district. However, there are many great buildings and cultural achievements left here, which are still worth reminiscing. In particular, the good climate is something that other cities cannot buy with money. It is not as bitterly cold as the frontier, nor as bitterly hot as the south of the Yangtze River. It is sunny for 360 days, except for a few days with wind and dust. When it rains, the streets are muddy, the houses are damp, and they cannot go out for a long time. This is the most distressing thing for Southerners. People in Beiping are happy when it rains. This is because it doesn't rain for 10 to 20 days. After the rain, it will be sunny immediately, with clear clouds in the sky, no dust, and the air in the city is particularly fresh. People in Beiping are inversely proportional to those in the south. Although the house is small, the yard must be large. The word patio is not universal, because every family has a large courtyard. There are trees everywhere. After the rain stops, you go to the West Hill and look down at the old capital. The towers and palaces are half hidden and half hidden among the green trees. You will feel that rain in the north is welcome. The south is afraid of rain, and the most afraid is the plum rain weather. From the beginning of April to the middle of May in the lunar calendar, it rains almost every day. But in Beijing, it is still sunny, and the temperature here is low. At that time, the crabapple blossoms and the willows are thick, which is the golden age. People who don't like to travel will inevitably visit the Three Seas and the parks at this time. Because of this, people from other places wait until April, when the trees in Beijing are green, and then come to visit. At this time, a young man who is very good at traveling came from Shanghai to Beijing for a tour. This was 3 years before Beijing was renamed Beiping. It was about the end of April. He lived in a very exquisite upper room. The house was painted red, with a corridor and 4 red pillars on the ground. Outside the corridor was a large courtyard with a wisteria frame in the air. The flowers were like pom-poms, hanging down in clusters among the tender yellow leaves. There were many pots of oleander on the steps and along the corridor, and the flowers were also in clusters on the branches. The young man, Fan Jiashu, leaned against a red pillar and watched the wisteria on the frame sway in the wind, shaking the bees standing on the flowers away and flying back again, which was very interesting. He held an open and rolled book in his hand, but put his hands behind his back. The courtyard was quiet, with only the sound of the bees' wings fluttering, buzzing. The sun passed through the wisteria frame, and the ground was covered with patterns. The wind blew, and the patterns on the ground moved, but there was a fragrance that touched people's clothes. Joshua felt very comfortable and stood still. At this time, a servant came over and said to him, "My cousin, today is Sunday. Why are you alone at home?" Joshua said, "I have been to all the famous places in Beijing. Your uncle and grandmother asked me to go to Zishan yesterday afternoon. I went there the day before yesterday and didn't want to go, so I stayed." Liu Fu, "Can you take me somewhere to play?" Liu Fu smiled and said, "There is a rule for our uncle to go to Zishan. He goes on Saturday afternoon and comes back on Monday morning. If you don't go this time, he will invite you next time. This is how foreigners do it. I don't know how our uncle has learned it. In fact, on Saturdays and Sundays, famous actors appear in the theater and wives are changed in the cinema. It's fun." Joshua said, "We are used to living in foreign houses in the Shanghai concession. We feel that they are not as elegant as Chinese houses. Such a nice courtyard you see. The red windows are matched with white screens facing. The flowers on the trellis are like a picture. It's not bad to read books at home." Liu Fu said, "I know that my cousin likes to enjoy the scenery. There is a pavilion in the middle of the bridge. You can go there." Joshua said, "Isn't the bridge a place where the lower class gathers?" Liu Fu said, "No, there is water all around, with flowers and pavilions in the middle, and there are very beautiful girls singing there." Joshua said, "Why have I never heard of such a place?" Liu Fu smiled and said, "I can't wrong you. There are flower trellises and trees there, and I love to go there." Joshua heard him talk so well, so he said, "It's boring at home. You hire a car for me, and I will go right away." "Is it too late to go now?" Liu Fu said, "It's too late. There are tea houses and restaurants there. If you are thirsty or hungry, you can rest." As he said that, he walked out of the gate. hired a rickshaw for Fan Jiashu, and let him go to the bridge alone. When Fan Jiashu usually went out for sightseeing, he was always accompanied by his cousin Tao Bohi, the owner of the place. He felt a little restrained. Today, he could go out for a free tour. He felt more relaxed and didn't feel lonely. He drove straight to the overpass. When he got there, the car stopped. There was a lot of noise all around, all of which were the sounds of bangzi, hukin, and gongs and drums. In front of him, there were 3 or 4 wooden supported buildings. There were many red paper signs hanging in front of the buildings, with gold or black letters on them, such as Dog Meat Pot, Wawa Sheng, and Narcissus and Little Peony jointly performing Sawing Sand Pot. He paid the fare, and walked over to see that there were many stalls connected to each other by the gate. In front of him, there was a large wheelbarrow, with many black pieces piled on the board, all as big as rice bowls, and hundreds of FLIs flying around. 2 snow-white knives were placed in the black block. A man stood beside the cart. He took the black block and cut it randomly on a wooden board with the knife. He cut many purple slices and handed it to people with a small piece of dirty old newspaper. He was probably selling braised beef or cooked donkey meat. Another stall had a large iron pot on the ground. There were many long black things in the pot, which looked like dead snakes with scales peeled off, coiled in the pot. A fishy and smelly smell came out of the pot. It turned out that it was boiled sheep intestines that northerners like to eat. Joshua frowned and turned around to see that there were several dirt alleys. On both sides of the alleys, there were reed sheds. In the 2 alleys ahead, from a distance, there were many red and green clothes hanging in the reed sheds. It was probably the most famous clothing appraisal street. There was a small alley on the side, and there were many people coming and going. At the entrance of the alley, there was a pile of old shoes on the gray ground. There were also a few small stalls, with kerosene lamps, porcelain basins, copper and iron utensils all over the floor. Going from here, there were reed sheds to the south and a wide ditch to the north. There was black mud and blue water flowing in the ditch, and it was stinking. Jiashu thought, since there are flowers and trees, Shuixin Pavilion is definitely not here. He turned back and walked onto the street to ask a policeman. The policeman told him that if he went south from here, the Shuixin Pavilion would be on the west side of the road. It turned out that Beijing was a square place, with streets and alleys running from north to south and from east to west, and people's houses were also square courtyards. So everyone who came here, young or old, knew the 4 directions, and when they talked about it, they didn't talk about up, down, left, right, but only about east, west, south, and north. At that moment, Joshua listened to the policeman and walked straight ahead. After walking past many reed sheds, he came to a wilderness. There was a ditch on the west side of the road. Although it was not clear, it didn't smell bad. On the other side of the ditch, there were a few willow trees about 10 feet long. It was impossible to go from one side of the ditch to the other side. There were 2 wooden bridges on the north and south sides. There was a small reed shed on the bridge head. There was a small table there, and 2 policemen were guarding it. People who went over had to pay 4 copper coins on the bridge side and buy a small red paper to go in. This was like buying a ticket. Joshua had to go take a look when he arrived here, so he paid 4 copper coins to buy a ticket to cross the bridge. On the other side of the bridge, there were some water holes dug on the flat ground, and taro and other plants were planted in them. There was no garden. Beyond the water holes, there were 5 or 6 large reed sheds, and there were quite a few tea houses inside. There was a circus in each shed. Fortunately, the people sitting there were still middle-class people and didn't show off. After passing through these reed sheds and crossing a ditch, there was a shallow pond with some new lotus leaves in it. On the other side of the lotus pond was a wooden house. Outside the house, there were 4 or 5 green trees growing diagonally. Under the trees was a squash rack with some squash and bean vines tied to it. The wooden house was painted blue and had 2 shang curtains hanging down. In the wind, the sound of orchestral music could be heard from afar. I thought, this place is somewhat interesting. Let's go and take a look. Joshua walked along a road. The wooden house was open to the south, opposite the red wall of Jonington, a cluster of ancient cypresses. Dozens of seats were placed in the house. There was a low platform in the north. There were 7 or 8 gorgeous drum girls sitting there, singing drum books in turn. Joshua wanted to sit down and rest for a while, but all the seats were full, so he turned around and walked back. The so-called Shuixin Pavilion is just like this. This kind of scenery doesn't seem worth lingering. First came in from the east, and now I'm going to go out from the west. When I went over, I saw a row of tea stalls. Passing through the tea stalls, there was a lot of noise. From a distance, there were people singing drum books, selling stories, wrestling, ventriloquism, and crosstalk. On the left was a cloth tent, surrounded by a circle of people. On the right was a wooden tent, surrounded by a circle of people. This is a real lower-class social club. There was a mound in the north, and a circle of people were gathered there, laughing loudest. Jiashu walked up to it and saw a bamboo pole holding a piece of tattered blue cloth, as dirty as a baby's diaper. There was a small table under the blue cloth, and 3 or 4 children were playing gongs and drums, and playing the huqin. When the blue cloth was lifted, a black man in his 40s came out, wearing a half-length gray cloth gown, a straw rope tied around his waist, a hat made of a cigarette paper box on his head, and a black beard hanging from his mouth. But in fact, it was only 40 or 50 ponytails. He walked to the table and glared, and the people watching cheered. He stretched out his hand to take off his beard, and said, "I haven't sung yet. How can I get up?" The huqin came, and I didn't have time to talk. He immediately put on his beard and sang again. Everyone saw it and laughed. Jiashu stood here and watched for a long time, feeling a little tired. Looking back, he saw a tea house that was relatively clean, so he stepped in and found a seat to sit down. There was a piece of red paper on the pillar, with a line of words written on it, 1 copper coin per person. Jiashu thought it was very cheap. It was a tea house he had never been to before. A waiter came over and put a white porcelain pot on the table, and asked, "Did you bring tea leaves?" Jiashu replied, "No." The waiter said, "I'll give you a pack of tea for 400 yuans. Fragrant tea, Longjing. Beijing people drink tea by the bag, not by the ounce. A pack of tea weighs about 1 coin. Usually, it costs a few copper coins per pack, also known as a pack of hundreds. 100 is a copper coin. There is no name for tea. Tea that has been brewed and added with jasmine flowers is called fragrant tea. Tea that has not been brewed and without flowers is called Longjing." Although Jiashu is from Zhejiang, he has been here for many days and knows the reason very well. At that time, he agreed to the 2 words Longjing, so he said, "You only charge 1 copper for water. Why do you spend 4 coppers to buy tea for people to drink?" The waiter laughed. "You are from the south. You don't understand. If you bring leaves yourself, we only charge 1 copper. If you eat our tea, we will only charge 1 copper for water, then you have to sell me." Jiashu heard him and laughed. "If all customers bring leaves, you will only charge 1 copper for water. Won't you lose a lot of money?" After hearing this, the waiter pointed to the backyard and laughed. "Look, we don't rely on selling water here." Jiashu looked at the backyard, where there were 2 wooden racks with many kinds of weapons inserted, some stone pillars and stone locks randomly placed, and a 1,000-pound load. There was another heavy house in the yard, where a group of people were drinking tea and chatting. On the door of the house, there was a banner written and posted there, which was "Making Friends with Martial Arts." At this time, someone came out, took the weapons from the rack, and practiced in the yard. Jiashu knew that this was a club for ordinary martial artists. Jiashu had a martial arts instructor in school, and he always found it interesting. Now he encountered a club like this, with many martial arts to visit, and he was very happy. He simply moved his seat closer to the railing in the backyard. First, he saw a few strong men in the yard, practicing swords and sticks for a while, and finally an old man in his 50s came out. He was wearing a purple flowered cloth sweatshirt, a large belt tied across his waist, and a tobacco pouch and a small sling hung on the belt. He was wearing blue cloth pants, and the leggings were tied to his knees. From a distance, he touched his arms and felt that he was full of energy. When he approached, he saw that he had a long face, a high nose, and only a few whiskers on his mouth. As soon as he walked into the yard, he rolled up his sleeves, stood firmly, held a stone lock in one hand, shook it a few times, and then raised it into the air. After raising it, he looked down, and after it fell, he looked up again. The stone locks were about 70 to 80 kilograms each, and 2 of them weighed more than 100 kilograms. This upward lift did not break it, but he saw his hands fall down, and his right hand raised up again, and the stone lock flew out and rushed over the roof. Jiashu saw it and was startled at first, but unexpectedly, the stone lock just passed the roof and fell straight down on the old man's head. The old man did not move his feet, but just slightly tilted his head to the left, and the stone lock fell steadily on his right shoulder. At the same time, he threw out the stone lock in his left hand and used his left shoulder to catch it. Jiashu saw it and couldn't help but secretly praised it. The old man walked backwards as if nothing had happened, and gently threw the 2 stone locks to the ground. The young men present shouted for a while, and 2 cheered. The old man just smiled when he saw people praising him. At this time, a strong man sat on the wooden bar of the 1,000 jin burden and said with a smile, "Uncle, you are very happy today, play with the big guy." The old man said, "Let me see you play with it first." The man turned around and took the wooden bar with both hands, picked up the 1,000 jin burden, slowly lifted it up, leveled it with his shoulders, gritted his teeth, and his face turned red. He quickly bent down, put down the burden, and smiled. "I am tired today, and it is even more impossible." The old man said, "Watch me." He walked forward, raised his hands first, held the burden to his stomach, paused, raised his hands upward, leveled his chin, paused again, stretched his hands straight, and raised them above his head. There were 2 large stone plates at both ends of the burden, like 2 stone mills, and the wooden bar was as thick as a teacup, inserted in the center of the stone plate. A stone mill weighs at least 200 jin, and it is even more difficult to lift it with the wooden bar at both ends. It takes at least 500 to 600 jin of strength to do it. Jiashu couldn't help but slap the table and shouted, "Good." The old man heard the cheers from here, put down the heavy burden, looked at Jiashu, and saw that he was wearing a blue lake crepe jacket with a fountain pen holder hanging on his lapel. The white face wearing a pair of tortoise shell round frame glasses. The hair on his head is neatly parted, but it is a little messy. This is clearly an aristocratic college student. Why is he here? He couldn't help but look at Jiashu twice. Jiashu thought that he was going to greet him, so he stood up and greeted him with a smile. The old man smiled and said, "Sir, do you love this too?" Jiashu smiled and said, "I love it, but I don't have the strength. You can't lift this heavy load. Are you over 50? The old man smiled and said, "More than 50. I hope you'll be born." Jiashu said, "That would make me 60. It's rare for a 60-year-old to have such great strength. What's your surname?" The man said it was Guan. Jiashu poured a cup of tea and sat down to talk with him. He found out that his name was Guan Shofeng, a native of Shandong, who made a living as a surgeon in Beijing. He asked Jiashu his name and why he came to such a tea house. Jiashu told him his name, and then said, "I live in Hangzhou. I am going to Beijing to take the college entrance examination, so I am taking extra classes now. I live at my cousin's house in Dongxi, Santiao Hutong." Shofeng said, "Mr. Fan, what a coincidence. We are neighbors. I also live in that Hutong. What is your house number?" Jiashu said, "My cousin's surname is Tao." Shofeng said, "Is it the Tao mansion with the red door? That is a big house. I heard that their master and his wife are all abroad." Jiashu said, "Yes, that's my uncle. He is a consul general, and took my aunt there. My cousin Tao Bohi is also working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now. But our home is okay. Not a big house." "Where is your home?" Shofeng laughed and said, "How can we talk about home? Where I live is a big courtyard. You are from the south, so you probably don't know what a big courtyard is. It means that there are more than a dozen families living in a yard, doing all kinds of things. Do you think such a place can be called home?" Jiashu said, "It doesn't matter. The quality of a person is not determined by the house he lives in. I also like to talk about martial arts. Since we live in the same alley, I will definitely go to see you one day." Shofeng stood up when he heard him call him that, stretched out his hand to scratch his hair, then clenched his fist several times and said, "My sir, what do you call me? I really don't deserve it. If you don't mind, I will visit you one day." He said, "When it comes to practicing martial arts, if you like to listen, there are plenty." As he said that, he patted his belly and belt, and said, "Don't call me that." Jiashu said, "You are just a few dollars short, but you can't wear good clothes, eat good food, or do big things. Are you going to waste your years just to be poor? I am only 20 years old this year. You are over 60 years old, 40 years older than me. It is not polite to call you uncle when I am walking with you." Shofeng slapped the table and turned to the people drinking tea, saying, "This gentleman is straightforward. I have never seen such a young master." Jiashu also felt that the old man was very straightforward. He talked to him for a while, and because it was sunset, he gave him the tea money and went home. When they arrived at Tao's house, The servant Liu Fu came in to serve tea and asked, "My cousin, is Shuixin Pavilion good?" Jiashu said, "Shuixin Pavilion is fine, but I met an old man who practices martial arts in the small tea house, and we got along very well. I want to learn some skills from him. Maybe he will come to see me tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." Liu Fu said, "Alas, my cousin, you are new here and don't know the situation here. There are all kinds of people in Tianqiu. How can you make friends with them?" Jiashu said, "It doesn't matter. Although there are many people from the lower class in Tianqiu, it cannot be said that there are no good people there. This old man is very straightforward and speaks very reasonably." Liu Fu smiled and said, "Is there anyone who can't speak among the people who travel around the world?" Jiashu said, "You haven't seen that person. How can you know whether he is good or bad? I know that you must see the one with a horseman in the car. That is a good person." Liu Fu didn't dare to argue too much, so he had to smile and leave. The next morning, the owner of this place, Tao Bohi, and his wife, had returned from the West Hill. Tao Bohi rested for a while in the upper room and hurried to the government office. Mrs. Tao went out because she had an appointment in the morning. Joshua was alone at home and felt very bored. He thought that since he had an appointment with the old man to go and see him, he might as well take advantage of today to get rid of this word. No matter whether it was good or bad, he must not break his promise to him, lest he say that I looked down on people. Guan Shoufeng also said yesterday that his family lived at the east entrance of this alley, in a broken door building, with 2 locust trees at the door, and it was easy to find. So he took some change with him and went out. When he walked to the east entrance of the alley, there was indeed such a place. He knew the rules in Beijing. No matter whether the door was open or not, he had to knock on the door before entering. Because there was no iron ring on the door, he just knocked on the door twice. At this time, a girl came out. She was about 18 or 19 years old. She had her hair braided in a bun at the back, with only some very short bangs in front. She had a round face, and was wearing a green cloth dress. Her hands and face looked white against it. There was a red string on her hair. She held a piece of white cross cloth in her hand, and walked out. Seeing Jiashu dressed so gorgeously, she asked, "Who are you looking for?" "This is a compound, not a house," Jiashu said. "I know it's a compound. I'm looking for a man named Guan. I wonder if he's home." The girl looked Jiashu up and down, and said with a smile, "My surname is Guan. Is your husband's surname Fan?" Jiashu said, "That's right, Uncle Guan." The girl quickly took over and said, "It's my father. He mentioned him as soon as he came back last night. He's at home now. Please come in and sit down." As she said that, she led him in front, and called out to the door of a south room, "Dad, come quickly. Mr. Fan is here." Shoufeng pushed the door open and came out, bowing repeatedly, saying, "Oh, this is terrible. There's really no place to sit." Jiashu smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I told you yesterday that you should be more polite." Guan Shoufeng had no choice but to lead the guest inside. Jiashu looked inside the house and saw a painted statue of Guan Yu in the middle, an old altar table with a set of 5 iron offerings, bows, arrows, swords, sticks, and 2 badger skins hanging on the wall. On the wall below, there were many bunches of dried herbs and dried gourds. To the west was an old square wooden table with many bowls and pots, and a clay stove was placed right below. To the east was a bed, and although the bedding was made of cloth, it was still clean. To the east was a room with a red cloth door curtain, and the red color had turned half gray. In this way, the father and daughter occupied these 2 rooms. Shoufeng asked Jiashu to sit on the bed, and the girl went into the house and brought out a teapot. He said, with a smile, "It's unfortunate that the stove is out. Let's go to the small tea house across the street to get some water." Jiashu said, "Don't bother." Shoufeng said with a smile, "You are a noble man who has come to a lowly place. Don't you want to drink a sip of tea?" Jiashu said, "That's not the case. When we make friends, we don't care about food and drink. As long as we get along with each other, it doesn't matter whether we drink tea or not. To be frank, if I want to find food and drink, I won't come to this slum. If there is no water, don't prepare it." Shoufeng said, "Okay, don't prepare it." As a result, the girl held a teapot and was in a dilemma. After all, she felt that it was too unreasonable for someone to come and not have a cup of tea, so she went to the small tea house to brew a pot of water. After searching for a while, she found a teacup and a small rice bowl, poured tea on the table. Then she said to Jiashu softly, "Please have some tea," and went into the west room. Shofeng said with a smile, "You don't have to drink this tea. We don't have tap water here. We don't even have sweet well water. This is bitter well water, which is a bit salty." The girl replied in the house, "No, this is tap water from the tea house at the entrance of the alley." Shofeng said with a smile, "Even if it's tap water, it won't work. Our tea is too bad." While they were talking, Jiashu had already picked up the teacup and took a sip, and said with a smile, "People should speak according to their own words. When they encounter salty water, they naturally drink salty water. While drinking sweet water, it is also good to practice drinking salt water." Uncle Guan just didn't have the opportunity. If he was born 50 years earlier, with such great skills, he could have worked as an escort in the escort agency, not to mention being an official. We young people have no ability at all. We rely on the money left by our ancestors. Even if we have good clothes and food, we can't drink a bowl of salt water with peace of mind like Uncle Guan. At this point, there was a plop. Shofeng stretched out his big palm and slapped it on the table, splashing all the tea bowls on the table. He raised his head and smiled. "I am so happy. My little brother. I have never met anyone who said that I was so accurate. Shugu, bring me my money bag. I want to invite Mr. Fan to have a drink and make such a good friend." The girl in the room agreed, and took out a small blue cloth bag, and said with a smile, "Don't invite Mr. Fan to the Shandong or Hun shop. Take the $1 I got for work today." Shofeng smiled and said, "Listen, Mr. Fan, even my daughter is willing to invite you, so don't be polite." Jiashu smiled and said, "Okay, I will bother you." At that moment, Guan Shofeng put the money bag into his body and led Jiashu out. When they reached the entrance of the alley, there was a small shop with a very narrow storefront. There was a coal stove at the entrance, and a big pot was placed on the coal stove, steaming. Looking inside, it looked like a dark alley. Shofeng pointed inside and said, "This is a meat shop opened by Shandong people. It only sells noodles and steamed buns. My daughter is afraid that I will invite you here." Jiashu nodded and smiled. After going to the street, Shofeng found a small Sichuan restaurant and the two went in together. After sitting down, Shofeng said first, a pound of huadio. Then he said to Jiashu, "I don't know southern dishes, please ask for it. If you can't eat more, it's not necessary, but if you don't have enough, it won't be enough. It's not good to be polite, and it's not fun." Jiashu did as he said because he was usually generous. After a while, the wine and food came up, and a small wine glass was placed in front of each person. Shofeng said, "Mr. Fan, do you know how to drink? If you can, I'll toast you 3 cups. If you can't drink, I'll toast you 1 cup. But you have to tell the truth." Jiashu said, 3 cups are fine." Shofeng said, "Okay, everyone drink as much as possible. I want to be polite. You are an old bastard." Jiashu smiled and drank 3 cups with him. First, the old man drank a few glasses of wine, and when he was happy, he talked about everything. He said that when he was young, he had been a bandit outside the pass for more than 10 years. Because he was chased by the soldiers, his wife and 2 sons were killed. He only brought his daughter Shugu with him to Beijing, washed his hands and became a good man. When he was a bandit, he never killed anyone, but his family was ruined and his family died. Killing people is even more unacceptable, so he changed to a surgeon in Beijing to save people to make up for his mistakes. Shugu came to Beijing when she was 2 years old, and now she is 21 years old. He has been a good man for 20 years. Fortunately, when they were drinking, it was not the time to sit down, and there was no one upstairs, so Shofeng talked to his heart's content. After the conversation, his face became the Guan statue worshipped at home. Jiashu said, "Uncle Guan, didn't you say we should drink until we are drunk? I am almost drunk. How about you?" Shofeng suddenly stood up, swayed a few times, put his hands on the table, and laughed. "I have drunk 3 pounds, it is time to get drunk. You should only drink enough. If you drink and then vomit, it is a sin. What's the point? Okay, let's go back and drink next time when we have money." When the waiter counted the bill, Shofeng took out the money in his pocket, and there were 10 more Beijing coins note, 100 copper coins, and poured them all on the table as a tip for the waiter. Jiashu accompanied him downstairs and wanted to hire a car for him on the street. Shofeng raised his arm and laughed. "Little brother, do you think I am drunk? What a joke." He held his head high and left. Since then, Jiashu has been in frequent contact with him and invited him to drink several times and bought some cloth for Shugu to make clothes. However, Jiashu often went to see Shofeng, but Shofeng did not come to see him. For 3 days, Jiashu and he did not meet, and when he went to see him again, the father and daughter had moved away. When he asked the neighbors in the yard, they all said, "I don't know." His daughter said she was going back to Shandong. Jiashu thought that this old man was a rare figure in the dust, and now he suddenly disappeared, which was particularly strange, and he was reluctant to leave. One day, the weather was very good and there was no wind and sand, so Jiashu went to the old tea house on Tiankyo to look for Shofeng's trace. According to the tea house, he sat here for a while one day, just sighing, and then he was not seen again. When Jiashu heard this, he felt even more strange, and slowly walked out of the tea house and walked along the circus at the door of this small tea house. From here to the south is the outer altar of Jonington. In April, the reeds in the altar grew to a height of about 1 foot. They were green and lush, reaching the city wall in the distance. In the green reeds, there were several large yellow boundaries which were from the outer altar. There were 2 main roads in the altar. On the other side of the road, there were some ancient cypresses. In the middle of the ancient cypresses, there stood a bell tower that stretched into the sky. Under the bell tower, there was an open space where some people gathered in groups. When Jiashu saw it, he slowly walked over. When he walked over there to see, there were also some acrobatics. On the base of the bell tower in the south, there was a man in his 40s, holding a 3-stringed instrument and playing it. He had a yellow face, a short beard, thick eyebrows and deep eye sockets, and looked very dirty. The black cloth jacket he wore showed a burnt yellow color. Because of this, although he held the 3-stringed instrument and played it, no one came to listen. Jiashu saw that he was very anxious, and his left hand was busy pressing the strings, moving up and down, but the tune was very pleasant to the ears. He felt sorry for him because he played so well, but no one paid attention to him. He walked over to see how he was doing. The man played for a while, but no one came forward, so he put down the sanxian and sighed, "These days." Before he could continue, Jiashu felt bad, so he took out a handful of copper coins from his pocket and gave them to him, saying with a smile, "Let me open a shop for you." The man took the money, let out a bitter smile, and said to Jiashu, "Sir, you are really a good person. To be honest, it's not like this every day. My niece hasn't come today." At this point, he stretched out his right palm, pointed at his eyebrows, looked into the distance, and said, "She's coming, she's coming. Sir, don't leave, listen to her singing, you won't be wrong." As he was talking, a girl of 16 or 17 came in, with a slightly pointed face, but with a rosy complexion, looking pretty, combed her hair, and her long eyebrows revealed her white skin from the sparse hair net. She was wearing an old blue bamboo cloth long gown, which was clean and tidy. She was holding a small drum and a bamboo drum stand in her hands. She approached and said to the man, "Second uncle, is the business open?" The man pursed his lips at Jiashu and said, "If this gentleman hadn't given me 200 yuan, I wouldn't have made a penny." The girl smiled and nodded at Jiashu. She set up the drum stand and put the drum on it, while looking at Jiashu from head to toe. She looked surprised. She wondered why such a person would come to such a place. The man who played the sanxian took out 2 drumsticks and a pair of clappers from a blue cloth bag beside him and handed them to the girl. The girl took the drumsticks, and before she even beat the drum, 7 or 8 people came to watch. Jiashu wanted to see how the girl sang, so he stood there without moving. After a while, the girl started to beat the drum. The man who played the sanxian played a passage on the sanxian first, then stood up and said with a smile, "My girl is just learning a few sets of books, so she doesn't sing well. Please forgive me. We are just trying to get together. Please sit on the grass or steps. Now let her sing a passage of Dayu said Autumn." This is a story from Dream of Red Mansions. I can't say it's good, but the girl sings it well. After saying that, he sat on the stone steps and played the sanxian again. The girl kept beating the drum, and her eyes unconsciously slid on Jiashu several times. When Jiashu saw her just now, he guessed that she was a smart girl. Although she was very simple, she had a kind of charming demeanor that could attract people. Now she kept looking at him, as if she knew that he pitied her, and was even more reluctant to leave. There were about 10 to 20 people around who were listening to the story, and they sat down on the grass and steps. Joshua was too embarrassed to sit down, so he saw an old cypress with a crooked trunk nearby, so he stepped on it with one foot, propped up his head with his hands, and watched the girl sing. The man who played the three-stringed instrument started to sing along with the girl, because he had received 2 strings of money from Joshua first, so he tried even harder. The three-stringed instrument was played word by word, very sadly. The girl lowered her eyes and sang slowly. 2 of the lines were in the cold and lonely Zhaoxiang courtyard. Gusts of west wind blew the green gauze window. The lonely Miss Lin, she secretly thought under the window, who knows the heart of a girl at this time. When she sang the last line, she dragged out the tail sound for a long time, but her eyes turned to Joshua again through her deep eyelashes. Joshua had never expected that the girl had any feelings for him, but now, from her singing, it seemed as if she was talking to him, and he couldn't help but feel moved. This kind of drum lyrics was originally popular. The girl sang so gracefully, and the three-stringed instrument played so sadly, that the people around lowered their heads and listened silently. After the singing, a few people stood up, wiped the dirt off their bodies, and walked away chatting. The man who played the three-stringed instrument quickly put down his instrument and took a small wicker plate on the steps to ask for money from everyone. Some gave 1 big coin, some gave 2 coins, and after collecting all the money, there were only more than 10 coins. Because Joshua was standing a little far away, he had just given him 200 coins, so he was embarrassed to come over to ask for more. Now, he shook the wicker plate, and felt that the money was too little. He smiled at him from a distance, and then walked forward. Joshua knew that he was here to ask for money, so he reached out and searched his body. Unexpectedly, all the change he had was gone, and he only had a few yuan in silver. Since the man was asking for money, he would be embarrassed not to give it, so he took out a silver dollar without hesitation and threw it into the wicker plate. The silver dollar fell on the copper plate with a clang sound. The man who played the sanxian was overjoyed to see Joshua so generous. He forgot why he was so generous, and handed the wicker plate to his left hand. He squatted down, lowered his right hand, and greeted Joshua. At this time, the girl also looked very surprised. She held the drum stand with her hand and stared at Joshua. Joshua didn't give this dollar to show his favor. Now the girl looked at him like this. She must have misunderstood, and he was embarrassed to look at him again. The man who played the sanxian almost laughed his beard upright and just thanked Joshua. He took the money, but the girl stepped forward, glanced at Joshua, and whispered a few words to the man who played the sanxian. He nodded several times and asked Joshua, "What's your last name?" Joshua said, "My last name is Fan." When Joshua answered this, he saw that the girl had turned her back to collect the drum, as if she was embarrassed. Besides, the audience had not dispersed yet, and he had already lost $1, which was enough to attract attention. It would be even worse to talk to them. After saying this, he walked away. From the bell tower to the outer altar gate, it was about a mile away, and Joshua walked slowly. When he was about to reach the outer altar gate, someone suddenly called out from behind, "Mr. Fan." Joshua looked back and saw that it was a fat, middle-aged woman who caught up with him, raised one arm, and waved from a distance in the sun. Joshua didn't know her, and didn't know how she knew his last name was Fan. He felt very strange, so he stopped and waited to see what she said. If you want to know who she is, I will tell you next time. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.